Welcome. This video features some examples of using reference parameters visualized to help you develop a mental model of what's going on. Now, in Qt Creator, when we use the debugger and are trying to debug a reference variable like y here, you don't get a clear view that y doesn't have its own storage. So I've got a breakpoint. I'm going to fire up the debugger, and we will see that x has been set to 10, y, which is a reference to an integer, has gotten a copy of x, it looks like, so it's got a value of 10, but it's not clear, other than that the type is an integer reference, that y doesn't have its own storage, that they're sharing the storage. So as I run this code and I change y to be 15, because y is referring to the memory that x has, y as an alias, just another name for x in this case, it's really changing x, right? And that's not crystal clear from what you see in the debugger. If you use the Python tutor website and I run the same code, it provides an illustration that really, this is kind of what should be going on in your mind when you see a reference variable. So we start it up, we've got our stack frame that's got space for x and y, and when we initialize y, which is an integer reference to point to x, it shows it as y is just this arrow, technically what's called a pointer, back to x. It's a link to x's memory. So anytime we talk about y now, we're talking about x's memory, which right now is 10, so we print y has got the value of 10. We assign 15 into y. Really, we're putting it in the place that that pointer points to. We're putting it into x. So this is the mental model you should have as you're working with references in code. Same idea when we have a function that has an integer reference like this add1 function. What that means is x is not going to have its own storage. It's going to link back to storage for num. Right? In kind of a normal program or a normal pass by copy parameter, this x, as we run this forward and we get to the add1 function, x is an integer, it has its own storage, it's going to get a copy of whatever was passed in this case 100, and so great, it's 100, but it's a distinct thing that it exists separately in memory from num. Right, now, same thing, but with a reference variable. When we call that function, x is no longer its own storage. It's really just pointing off to where we can find the storage we're going to work with. Right? And so in this case, num got passed in, so x ends up pointing back to num. X in the add1 function is another name for num back out in main. So the reference parameter kind of makes this backdoor, this way to get outside the function back into the function where we were working. If I change x in here, I'm really changing num back out in the main function. But once again, this just is not visible as you're debugging code. If we go run that same example in Qt Creator, so let's go ahead and just put a breakpoint right before the add num function, and we'll rebuild this code and run it. All right, we get to here, we see that num is 100. I hit step into to watch add1 run. I can see that x is an integer and it's got the value 100, but there's no notion, there's no indication that this is really not a new variable. It's the same as the one that's out in main, and as I run that increase x by 1, back in main, I've really changed num to be 101. It's this invisible link that you should have a mental in your head. You should be kind of making that implicit link explicit and thinking of that reference variable as just a link back to some other piece of memory.